Hello and welcome to another gentle voyage through the quieter corners of history. You're here with us at Boring History for Sleep, a place where the past unfolds not with urgency, but with calm, steady rhythm, meant to lull you into rest. Tonight we step quietly aboard a creaking wooden ship, sailing under a sky heavy with stars, across oceans whose names were not yet fully known. You will not rush nor command. You are not the hero of this story. You are simply a sailor. The year is somewhere in the early 1500s, a time when maps ended in dragons, and the sea was both a hope and a hunger. You are part of a crew bound for distant lands, but what you're more familiar with is the sway of the ship, the slap of rope, and the taste of salt that never quite leaves your tongue. Let the waters rock you now. Let the slow rhythm of their lives become the rhythm of your breath. We begin, not with fame or fortune, but with the quiet hardship of the average man aboard. Imagine yourself waking, not to the sound of birdsong, but to the soft groan of thick, tarred timbers, and the gentle shouts of men hauling rope just before dawn. There is no bed, just a hammock strung tightly in a narrow berth, damp from the night air, and gently swinging with each breath the sea takes. The smell is a sour mixture of salt, sweat, stale fish oil, and old wood. It clings to the sails, to the deck, to your skin. You've stopped noticing. Your clothes are the same ones you slept in. Rough wool, coarse linen, already worn thin from weeks of labor. They itch where salt has crusted into the seams. You've been at sea for 30 days? Or perhaps 40. Time is elastic here, measured more by rations than calendars. You begin your morning by not eating, because breakfast doesn't really exist. There is hardtack, a biscuit so hard you sometimes need to soften it with seawater and pick the weevils out before biting. Some sailors eat the weevils. More protein, they say with a shrug. You climb up onto deck. It's your turn at the rigging. The sails need trimming. The wind has shifted overnight. The rope is thick and coarse against your palms, burning and fraying the same skin that touched it yesterday, and the day before that. You are always either pulling, coiling, tying, or climbing. Your fingers are never clean. Your back never fully straightens. When you are not working, you are waiting. And when you are not waiting, you are watching. For storms, for land, for nothing. The ship is its own small world. Wooden bound together with pitch and iron nails, it creaks constantly. Not loudly, just enough to always remind you it's alive. Not alive like a beast, but like a patient that's just barely holding on. Fresh water is rationed, a pint a day if you're lucky. You drink it slowly, warm, slightly sour from the barrels. Meat comes salted, pork if you're fortunate. But it's so heavily cured you must soak it for hours before it can be chewed. And still it's like leather. Your teeth ache. You've noticed the gums bleeding now and then. That's scurvy, but no one knows the word yet. Just that your body is quietly losing its fight. And still, you keep pulling rope. Sometimes you look up at the sky. It's vast, serene. The stars are closer here, as if painted just for you, and the moon, it casts a long silver trail on the waves, like a road you cannot follow. There are no birds, no fish, just the sound of the ship, the creaking, the slap of sail, and the distant hum of the men around you, all of them tired, all of them waiting for land that may or may not come. Punishment is swift. If you fall asleep on duty, you're flogged. If you argue with the boatswain, you're flogged. If you steal another man's ration, you may be bound, starved, or cast adrift. No trial, just command. There is a superstition about whistling. You don't do it. It calls the wind, they say. And not always the kind you want. There is also a strange respect for the albatross, a bird of omen if it flies too close, and for the full moon, when dreams grow stranger and tempers rise. Nights are long. You doze in shifts, if at all. The ship never stops. neither do the watches. You might take solace in carving wood, or mending a net, or humming a low tune as you scrub the deck. Little rituals that give the days a shape. But mostly, you exist in waiting. Waiting for land or storms, or simply for the next task. You are anonymous, one of many. Part of the hull in a way, expendable yet essential, and though you chose this life, or were pressed into it, you carry on. Because turning back is not a direction that ships understand. And so, the waves rise, the sails fill, the night falls, and you, quietly, pull another rope. As the creak of your hammock fades into the sway of thought, let us shift now from the daily toil of nameless sailors to one man, a quiet shadowed figure in the margins of a much larger story. His name was Enrique of Malacca, or perhaps we never knew his real name at all. There are no portraits of him, no surviving letters, no written testimony, and yet his presence lingers, woven subtly into the threads of one of the most ambitious voyages in history. It begins, as many such lives do, in the haze of colonization. He was likely born in Southeast Asia, on or near the lush, humid shores of Malacca, in what is now modern-day Malaysia. The air there was warm and sweet with spice, the markets full of voices and color, and at some point, as a boy or a young man, he was captured, taken in a raid, or perhaps sold into slavery, and brought west to a foreign world of wool, prayer, and politics. He became the property of a Portuguese nobleman, and later was acquired by Ferdinand Magellan, the explorer famed for orchestrating the first circumnavigation of the globe. Magellan gave him the name Enrique, and baptized him into Christianity. He was now both a servant and a tool, a bridge between worlds. Enrique spoke Malay, the lingua franca of maritime Southeast Asia, a tongue understood in ports and palaces from Sumatra to Mindanao. He may have spoken other languages too. He learned Portuguese. He watched and listened. Imagine him now, quietly standing just behind Magellan, as royal advisors squinted at unfamiliar charts, as contracts were drawn, ships outfitted, crews assembled. He would have seen the grand halls of Lisbon, walked the stone courtyards, heard the wheels of empire turning, but he belonged to none of it. And when the ships finally set sail in 1519, 5 vessels under the Spanish flag, Enrique was aboard. He was not the captain, not an officer, not even listed as a free man, but his presence was essential, for as the expedition wound its way down the coast of Africa, across the Atlantic, through the treacherous straits at the southern tip of the Americas, the men aboard whispered in many languages, but only Enrique understood the place they were sailing toward. They crossed into the Pacific Ocean, a name it would not yet bear, and drifted across vast silence, unmapped, unknown. Months passed. Scurvy took hold. Men perished. One ship deserted and turned back. Still they sailed on, and eventually, they reached the Philippine archipelago. Here Enrique became invaluable. He stepped ashore and began to speak. He spoke to local chieftains, translated offerings, negotiated peace, built bridges through breath alone. It's said that for the first time in the voyage, communication was smooth. Magellan, who could not speak the local tongues, relied on Enrique to manage every interaction. He was now the voice of the fleet. But history turned quickly. In April 1521, Magellan was killed in the Battle of Mactan, a conflict sparked by cultural misunderstanding, religious pressure, and local resistance. Suddenly, Enrique was no longer a servant. He was a free man. In Magellan's will, it was stated that Enrique was to be freed upon his master's death. But the remaining Spanish commanders ignored this. They ordered Enrique to continue serving the fleet. And so, sometime shortly after, he vanished. Whether he escaped into the islands, was aided by local leaders, or simply disappeared in the tropical dark, we do not know. But what makes Enrique's story so quietly remarkable, so softly revolutionary, is this. He may well have been the first person in history to circumnavigate the globe. Not Magellan, not Elcano, but Enrique. Born in the east, brought west by ship, and returned years later on the same route, by different winds. And if he did survive, he did so without ceremony, without journals or glory, without a nation to claim him. Just a man who crossed the world and came back, not with a crown, but with silence. As the sun sets on his trail, let us drift now toward quieter questions, to a place that once was drawn on maps and now exists only in memory and myth. Now we turn away from men and maps, from ropes and voyages made. We turn instead toward the horizon, out where the sea meets the sky. There were always rumors, places seen and not seen, islands that flickered in and out of view, sometimes real, sometimes imagined. One of the most enduring of these was called High Brazil. No one alive has ever found it. No one alive ever will. And yet for centuries, it appeared on maps, lingered in logbooks, haunted the dreams of sailors and scholars alike. Let's begin with the name. High Brazil, not to be confused with the country of Brazil, comes from Irish legend. Its roots trace to Bresile, or Breezel, a figure in Celtic mythology. In some tales, it is the name of a mystical island, veiled in mist, appearing once every 7 years, just long enough to be seen, then fading again into fog and ocean. Imagine yourself on deck, in the late 1300s. The sea is calm, the sun is low, and far off in the west, there's a shape, a landmass, just visible, rising like a gray dome above the horizon. Your ship turns toward it, sails groaning, men pointing, but the closer you draw, the more it seems to vanish, as if the island is dissolving into light. This happened not once, but many times. High Brazil appeared on charts for over 500 years, from the 14th to the 19th century, often drawn as a perfect circle, sometimes with a river splitting it in two, placed somewhere west of Ireland, or southwest, near the Azores. What made this island so persistent? Some believed it to be a land of eternal wisdom, inhabited by a race of advanced beings. Others claimed it held vast riches, its shores lined with trees that whispered in strange tongues. There were even a few supposed encounters. In 1674, an Irish captain named John Nisbet reported landing on High Brazil during a voyage from France to Ireland. He spoke of a fog clearing to reveal a green land, gentle and rich, inhabited by strange robed men who gave him gold and ancient knowledge. Another account, from the 1400s, tells of a man who lived on the island for 2 years before returning, changed, silent, distant. But none of these tales were ever proven. No one could find High Brazil twice, and slowly, as cartography became more scientific, the island began to disappear from the charts. By the mid-1800s, it was largely gone, erased, but even in erasure, it remains. Modern scholars suggest High Brazil may have been a misidentified rock formation, a mirage caused by Fata Morgana, an optical illusion created by warm and cool air layers bending light. Others believe it was inspired by real sightings of the Porcupine Bank, an underwater plateau west of Ireland that rises close to the surface. Yet, the mystery clings. Because High Brazil is more than a place, it is a concept, a longing, a horizon that cannot be reached. It represents something sailors knew well, the vastness of the world, the things just beyond grasp, the flickering promises of land that vanish as you draw near. And it lives on, in ancient maps, in whispered stories, in the minds of those who gaze out to sea and wonder if what they saw was ever really there. As the waves roll on, as the stars slip behind clouds, let us leave High Brazil to its fog, unfound, undisturbed. Our final stop awaits us, a place not of myth, but of contrast, where wood-paneled rooms and leather chairs kept the salt and the scurvy far away. Now gently we return to the ship, but not to the damp hammocks of the common deckhands, not to the salt-stiff rope or the weevil-bitten bread. No, now we pass through a heavy oak door and into the quiet world of the captain's quarters. This was a very different space, not large by land standards, but aboard a 16th century vessel, it was as close as one came to luxury. Let your eyes adjust. The cabin is dim, lit by a swinging lantern overhead, its yellow flame casting soft shadows on the planked walls. You are surrounded by dark wood, polished, oiled and faintly scented with beeswax. The boards creak gently beneath your feet, but the space feels solid, protected. To your right, a broad desk fastened to the floor. Upon it lies a spread of maps, some new, some ancient, some wildly inaccurate. They're held down by brass weights, beside a silver inkpot and a quill with a trimmed black feather. A large compass rests nearby, its needle jittering ever so slightly as the ship sways. And behind the desk, a wooden chair with arms and a high back, unthinkably grand to a deckhand, but worn smooth from long hours of use. This is where the captain would sit, not idly, but writing, always writing. Logs, weather notes, memos to the Admiralty, and quiet reflections no one else would read. Look farther. A cot with cushions sits near the wall, a mattress stuffed with wool, covered by a faded quilt or perhaps a fur, depending on the voyage. It is not feather soft, but compared to a swinging hammock on the open deck, it feels like a royal bed. A small chest of drawers holds the captain's personal items, letters from home, a spare shirt, freshly laundered in port, perhaps a miniature portrait in a locket, tucked into a side compartment, and food, preserved fruits and nuts stored in small tins, far removed from the salted pork and ship's biscuit that sustained the rest of the crew, a bottle of sherry perhaps, or a flask of brandy, not for indulgence, but for dignity, a reminder that out here one must hold on to civility. There is no loud voice in this room. The captain does not bark here. This is the place for quiet decisions, for reading the charts, for calculating distance with a cross staff or astrolabe, while the rest of the ship rocks to sleep. The walls are lined with small items that tell quiet stories, a weathered dagger, perhaps ceremonial, a nautical instrument handed down through generations, a half-finished letter to someone far away. These were men of paradox, at once powerful and deeply isolated. To be a captain was to carry not just the weight of navigation and discipline, but the burden of every soul on board. He could not show doubt, he could not fall ill, he could not afford sentiment, and yet he was not above fear. Storms still shook the ship, disease still crept below. Mutiny was never more than a whisper away. So he lived apart, he dined alone, he prayed alone. He stared out the rear windows, if the ship had them, watching the ocean unroll behind them, like the long tail of time. There were nights long and breathless, when the ship seemed utterly still, and on those nights, as the candle burned lower, the captain would open his journal, scratch ink into paper and record, without drama, the position of the stars, the strength of the wind, and how many men had fallen that day. And in this, there was a kind of ritual, a stillness that mirrored the ocean's depth. For all their command, captains were sailors too, just slightly better dressed, slightly more removed from hunger and cold, but never quite separate from the sea. As dawn approached, he would extinguish the lantern and rest, if only for a few hours, wrapped not just in blankets, but in the weight of responsibility. And so, as the waves flatten and the ship drifts slowly into silence, we leave the age of discovery behind. Not with fireworks, not with conquest, but with the quiet rhythm of days at sea. You've felt the coarse rope in your hands, you've walked among the forgotten. You've watched a man vanish into history and gazed toward an island that never truly was. You've stood in a cabin where decisions were made, not in shouts, but in soft ink on parchment. And now, you are safe in your own cabin. Far from salt winds, far from swinging hammocks and swollen decks. The world is still vast, still filled with myths and maps and quiet legends. But for now, let them drift. Let them pass like sails on the horizon. Close your eyes, let the ship disappear, and sleep as the tide of history washes gently away. Good night, and thank you for listening.